Chapter 2. In everyone's life, at some time, our inner fire goes out. It is then burst into flame by an encounter with another human being. We should all be thankful for those people who rekindled the inner spirit. Quote by Albert Schweitzer, German philosopher and theologian. My extracurricular class of the day was basketball practice. Every Tuesday and Friday, the team met up in the gym to play a few games while our coach tried to teach us new plays.
Dude, pass it!
Pete yelled to me from the other side of the court. I dodged around some of the other guys, dribbling fast. I faked a throw toward Jerry, but caught the eye of Tim, the center, and passed it to him instead. Tim swerved with the ball and spun in a tight half circle around an opponent. He threw the ball, and it spun around the rim of the net before finally falling in. I high-fived a couple of the guys.
All right, guys.
Coach Green clapped his hands and blew his whistle.
Good try. Form up again.
When I think back on it, I don't remember that much of the game or exactly what happened, but between the shouts and cheers, something was being drowned out. One of the other guys had scored, and the few kids sitting in the bleachers cheered. It wasn't until we formed up to start again and the gym quieted that we heard it. Screams. They weren't shouts of spectators, which normally accompanied our games and occasionally our practices. They were screams of terror. The other team's center stopped with the ball in his hands and looked around. Others also stopped and began to listen. Within seconds, everyone was looking toward the double doors that led into the school.
What's happening?
Pete asked, wiping at the sheen of sweat on his forehead.
Everyone stay back!
Yelled Coach Green as he waved us back. He peered through the door's small windows.
Coach, what is it?
Someone asked from the back of the room. Coach Green's face paled, and his eyes darted back and forth.
Outside! Go outside!
He yelled, pointing to the gym's back door, which led out into the parking lot. The others looked at each other, waiting for someone to take charge. I sucked in a breath, not fully sure of what to do, and ran for the back door. I slammed my hands in the bar latch. It swung open, hitting the brick wall adjacent to it. I stopped in my tracks. About 20 feet in front of me on the grass was a pillar of fire that blasted up from a single point in the ground. Suddenly, it began to spread, engulfing the school in a wall of fire that now separated us from the outside. I was in total shock. I wanted to get away from the wall of fire, but my legs would not cooperate. In my head, I was screaming at myself to back up, close the door and hide, but every muscle in my body was stiff. I don't remember feeling any heat coming off of the fire, but it didn't matter. I was too close, heat or not. Tim had followed me out. He snapped himself out of it before I could.
Fire!
He yelled. He quickly grabbed the back of my shirt and pulled me inside, yanking the door shut behind us. I stumbled back and hit the floor hard. I gasped, not realizing that I had been holding my breath, and looked down at my hands. They were shaking violently. I pushed through the shock and got to my feet, refusing to look behind me at the door standing between us and the raging fire. My friends, teammates, and I gathered around Coach Green, looking for some explanation for the chaos rising around us. The screams from inside the school were getting louder. We were trapped. And then it hit me. Willow was still in the school. She could be in trouble.
I have to go in there. Willow's in there,
I said. The adrenaline that had taken over while I stared at the wall of fire rushed back through my limbs. I ignored the protest from my friends and sprinted for the door, ducking under Coach Green's hand as he tried to catch me. I slammed the doors open and tumbled through. My legs locked up when I saw what lay beyond the doors. Students and teachers alike were writhing and screaming in pain on the floor of the hallway, blindly lashing out at things only they could see. Screams echoed down the hallway from every corner of the school. The ceiling lights were flickering in and out, and whole sections of the hallway were doused in darkness. I hesitated for only a second before I took a breath and started to jog down the hall towards Willow's classroom. I carefully stepped over people lying on the linoleum floors. Some were muttering under their breaths, and others were outright screaming. One of the janitors was crawling across the floor, shouting, "Bodies! The bodies!" I inched around him, trying to stay away from his grasping hands. He saw me and held out his hands.
Save me. Save me.
I jumped away from his grasp. He rolled over and hugged the wall, slamming his fists into the concrete and drawing blood. Shaking, I crept down the hall, careful not to step on anyone. They were all the same. All the students and teachers in the hall were caught in the same hallucination, and a sinking feeling in my gut told me it was only a matter of time before it would also happen to me. Not before I find Willow, I scolded myself. Willow had to be safe. I ran past a wall of windows, which should have offered a view of the schoolyard, and skidded to a halt. Instead, the view was that of the same fire that we had seen from the back door of the gym. I felt myself start to shut down again. Willow, I reminded myself. I have to keep going. The fire was at least 3 stories high, but as I sprinted past the windows, I noticed that the fire had no source other than the grass. What was feeding it? Was it surrounding the whole school? I looked away, determined to make it to Willow's classroom before the fire or the chaos could get to me. Finally, I reached her classroom, but she wasn't there. I shouted her name over the chaos of voices and screams. I searched the faces of people sprawled in the hallways and into the classrooms, but I saw no sign of her. I began running from room to room, throwing doors open and repeatedly shouting her name. I stumbled to a stop in the main hallway. Willow was standing across the expanse of the hallway, staring at another girl whose back was facing me. The other girl was unaffected by the insanity around us. I couldn't see her face, but I saw messy blonde hair. Her shoulders rose and fell harshly as she breathed. I slid behind an overturned table and watched the silent, staring battle between the 2 girls. Willow took a step forward. The other girl, who I vaguely recognized as a transfer student from weeks ago, stood her ground but clenched her fists. Willow took another step forward. Her eyes never blinked, never wavered. Beads of sweat trailed down her brow. Her expression was more intense than I'd ever seen. I shifted behind the table, and my foot knocked into a jar and it rattled across the floor. The other girl's head snapped in my direction, and fierce blue eyes found me. I wasn't in the school anymore. Instead, I was surrounded by a hurricane of fire. It roared and hot winds circled around me, whipping my clothes.
Stop!
I shouted, but the fire closed in. The heat was nearly unbearable. I wanted to close my eyes, but they wouldn't close. It's all your fault, Eugene, whispered a familiar voice in my mind, resonating through my skull and into my bones. As I heard the words, a face protruded from the fire and a flame shot out towards me.
You should have never been born,
said a familiar voice, louder this time. Another face, another flame.
You could have killed us all,
shouted a third voice. A third face appeared, and the 3 joined together, whispering and shouting their hatred. Each of the voices and faces belonged to my mother, father, and brother, all rolled into one judgmental, 3-headed fire beast. It circled me from the waves of the flames, licking at my heels and my face, growling angrily. My family stared down at me, their faces reflecting the hatred in their words. You killed us, Eugene, it said, the faces bobbing. You made us die because you are too weak. Their voices had merged, creating an entirely new one. No, I said.
No, I didn't mean to. I'm sorry.
I shielded my eyes against the hot glare of the fire beast.
Too late,
it screeched, and the monster rose up like a snake preparing to strike. I covered my head with my arms, yelling.
I'm sorry!
The monster struck, but when it did, the fire exploded around me and dissipated, leaving me in total darkness. I spun around, reaching with my hands to find something, anything. The darkness was so absolute that I couldn't see my hands in front of my face. My breath sounded loudly in silence. I reached down in the darkness to touch the floor, but there was nothing there. I was standing on air. My heart beat faster. What if I fell? What would I fall into? Something sparked in the distance. A light. I ran forward, not entirely sure that I wouldn't fall into nothingness. I could feel the heat at my back. The fire beast was bubbling back from the darkness. I could hear its vicious whispers rising. The closer I got to the light, the more I realized that it wasn't a light. It was a person. It was Willow. She stood, reaching her arm out toward me. She glowed. "Be strong," echoed her voice in my mind. "It's an illusion. It can't hurt you."
Willow.
I gasped, clasping her outstretched hand. The darkness evaporated, and I was in the hallway again, standing in front of Willow and holding her hand. Willow was on her knees, but she was looking past me at the other girl. She let go of my hand. The girl gritted her teeth and screamed in frustration. "You need to stop," Willow said to her. "You don't need to do this."
Who are you to tell me what to do?
The girl shouted. The others, still stuck in illusions, gasped and screamed.
You're hurting people, Laura!
Willow pushed herself to her feet, never letting her gaze waver from the girl. The girl, Laura, sobbed. Her blue eyes were red-rimmed and angry.
They hurt me first. It's my turn.
She stamped her foot, and the whole school shuddered. All around us, monsters made of black slime, glistening like an oil slick, began welling up from cracks in the floor. They were huge, salamander-like, with bulbous limbs and dripping claws. Their teeth and eyes were molten red, glowing with the light of a waking volcano. The kids on the floor began emerging from their personal nightmares, only to enter the one we were all sharing. Willow didn't break eye contact with Laura, but instead reached out and grabbed my hand again. Her fingers were slick with sweat. I squeezed them tightly, hoping some of the strength she had given me would pass back to her. "Willow, what is this?" I whispered. I could see tears forming at the corners of her eyes. They were angry tears, frustrated tears. "When this is all over, Eugene, I'll explain everything. But for now, trust that I know what I'm doing." I had never seen her serious about anything but her schoolwork. Everything else was a joke or a game. "What can I do?" I asked. "Don't let go," she whispered, squeezing my hand. She closed her eyes. Cries from the slime monsters pierced the air as they crawled out of the floor, joining the shouts and screams of the students on the floor. The monsters filled the entire space of the hallway within seconds. Willow squeezed my hand, and she dragged me away from Laura, through an emergency exit and out into the front lawn of the school. The wall of the fire surrounding the school burned even taller and brighter. It roared and reached toward us like grasping hands. Dark smoke spilled upwards. Willow didn't let me stand there for long before she was dragging me toward the fire. I screamed in protest.
It's not real!
She shouted before dragging me with her into the fire. I expected heat. I expected to feel the pain of my skin burning off. But I felt neither. We landed hard on the other side, rolling across the grass. I touched my chest and hair, expecting them to be on fire, but I was fine. Willow scrambled up and pulled me to my feet. The fire was gone, and the school looked like it did every other day. No fire or slime monsters trawling every surface. The blue sky wasn't tainted with smoke, but instead lazy white clouds passed overhead. "Where'd it go?" I asked in shock. "You can only see it inside her sphere." Willow turned to look back at the school. Sphere? It's the area she can influence." I had more questions than answers, and my whole perception of Willow was beginning to change. She clutched at her hair, loosening it from the braid that had come partially undone. "I know this is all confusing, but I promise I'll explain later. Come on." She took my hand and led quickly across the lawn. "Who is she?" I asked, breathless as we ran. "Her name is Laura," she replied. We stopped on the side of the school where the gym was. "She's a sophomore who transferred from a school in Indianapolis." "How is she doing this?" "Somehow she's taking people's fears and nightmares and turning them into hallucinations." "What do we do now?" I expected her to say we should go for help, but I should have known better. Willow clung tighter to my hand. "We have to find the source." "The source?" "Yes." She pulled at my hand and we plunged back into what Willow called the sphere. Fire surrounded us again, but it was now even higher and louder. From somewhere above us, ash began to fall and coat the ground in a fine gray blanket. Laura made a decoy. That's what I was facing in the hallway. She's actually somewhere else. I don't get how you know all this, I said as Willow let go of my hand to open the back door of the gym. My teammates inside had succumbed to Laura's illusions and were screaming and shouting. Eugene, the second you feel her trying to make you see illusions, tell me, she said. We ran hand in hand through the school. Willow seemed to know where she was going, so I let her lead me through each hallway. I didn't know what was going on or why this was happening. Willow was so focused on finding the real version of Laura that I was sure any questions I had would go unanswered. We turned a corner, still running, and collided with someone. We fell to the floor, but I scrambled to my feet and stared at the person we had run into. Harry! Willow smiled and got to her feet using my arm as leverage. Harry, the nerdy football player, stood in front of us.